how's it going? What you see in front of you is the best camping stove that money can buy. This is the Soto Windmaster. It is the self-proclaimed, supported or unsupported, best of the best of camping stoves. If you're the kind of backpacker or camper who only feels comfortable using the best gear out there, look no further. This is basically it. The way that I got a hold of this stove was I actually bought it for $14. I did that with a $50 coupon on Amazon that I got from an app. I was buying my lunches at work with an app called MealPal. I signed up a coworker for MealPal, and 60 days later they sent me $50 off Amazon. That brought the price of the Soto Windmaster stove down from $64 down to $14. So ironically, I already own the BRS stove and the Fire Maple, both. I paid $25 for both. One of the huge selling points on these two stoves was the low price. And then, ironically, I was able to get the best stove ever made for $10 less than what I spent on either of these other stoves. What also is ironic is I ended up getting the Fire Maple stove because I waited a long time to get that coupon from Amazon, from MealPal. The coupon never showed up. And backpackinglight.com came out with a video about the Fire Maple stove. It was only 25 bucks, so I grabbed it, thinking I might not ever get a chance to buy the Windmaster. And then like a few days later, less than a week later, I got the $50 coupon from Amazon, from MealPal, got the stove. Now, I could tell you that the pot stand that comes with the stove is about the same weight as these two stoves. So this one is like 1.5 ounces. The BRS, the Fire Maple is about 1.5 ounces. This pot stand also is about 1.5 ounces, and so is the the Windmaster from Soto. So you know, this pot stand kind of doubles the weight of the burner, and I only paid $14 for the whole stove with that $50 coupon. So if I were to go ahead and buy the UL pot stand from Soto for this Windmaster stove, the UL pot holder, the UL pot stand, will end up costing me about the same price as the whole stove. So it's just kind of funny the way the prices all worked out. I ended up spending like $50 on these two UL stoves, and then only 14 bucks on the Windmaster. And as a result, now I've got 3 stoves. The other interesting thing about these fuel canisters is they have a tendency to kick out similar BTUs on most stoves, okay? So I didn't really notice a massive increase in speed as far as boil time. So when you're boiling water, what I kind of monitored was that the boil time on each of these 3 stoves was similar. The Fire Maple has a tendency to kick out some pretty heavy-duty BTUs. But there is a tremendous amount of space in between the burner and your mug. Okay, so when you put your mug on here, there's like a ½ an inch of space for the wind to blow through. The Windmaster claims ownership over the flame that the stove creates by having this lip around the burner. So the way that this is constructed is it's round, and it's almost the same diameter as a can of Red Bull. So if you have a can of Red Bull and you look at the top of that Red Bull, this burner is almost that wide. And then it's got a lip that goes up around the burner, which acts as the windscreen, so you don't need to set up a windscreen. Now, to say that it's going to work all the time, obviously that might not be true. In the backcountry, you might find yourself in extremely high winds. But in order to camp in really high winds, you're going to need to set up your shelter. Whether you have a tarp or a tent, you're going to set up the shelter with the side with no door on the shelter facing the wind. And then you're going to sit in the shelter facing the door on the side that the wind isn't blowing. Now, around the edges of your shelter, enough air is going to be moving around still to prevent one of these little stoves from working. But this lip on the Windmaster Soto stove, that's going to prevent the stove from malfunctioning in basic wind, you know? If you've got a shelter set up around you, blocking the wind, the stove is going to work. Okay, now there's some situations at high elevations where you need your fuel canister to be turned upside down in order for your stove to work. Now, obviously, the Soto Windmaster doesn't work with the fuel canister upside down. So, you know, when we talk about the Soto Windmaster being the best stove out there for camping and backpacking, that's taking into consideration the fact that the fuel canister needs to be faced right side up to cook anything. All right, so if you're in extremely high elevations and you're in circumstances, cold circumstances where you need this fuel canister to be turned upside down in order to cook anything, then suddenly the Soto Windmaster is no longer the best of the best, you know. But in circumstances where you're able to cook something with your fuel canister turned right side up, it is implied that, or it is assumed that the Soto Windmaster is like the best camping stove out there. All right, so, you know, basically, when you put your pot on the Soto Windmaster, your pot is very, very close to the burner. So the amount of space that's in between the burner and your pot is minimized to about a half a centimeter, okay? So there's only like a half a centimeter of space where the wind can blow in there. Plus, it's got this lip that kind of sticks up that prevents the wind from blowing directly on the burner, okay? Plus, the burner is pretty wide so that, you know, it takes control of the flame and prevents the flame from shooting up around the sides of your pot. However, the flame is wide enough that it heats up your titanium so that the sides of your mug pot get hot. So even the handle on your mug pot will get hot, even though the flame isn't actually like coming up the sides of the mug pot. Now on these other two stoves, the 1.5 ounce stoves, that's not the case. On both of these other stoves, you'll see the flame coming way up around your pot, okay? Now, there's plenty of space for the wind to blow underneath both of these. And more or less, I would say that the BRS struggles with wind or air movement the most. I think that the BTUs are probably the lowest on the BRS, and the BRS struggles to boil water more than the other stoves. If the BRS is going to boil your water, I would say the boil time is similar, but there are some circumstances where the BRS is not going to be able to boil your water, and you really need to have a windscreen on here. Now, the Fire Maple kicks up a little bit more force and has a slightly higher BTU than the BRS and functions a little bit better, but the distance from your pot to the Fire Maple is pretty far, and plenty of air can blow underneath your pot, okay? So, you know, the BTUs, the heat that come out of these fuel canisters is very, very high, you know, and I have some experience working on motorcycles. I built myself a little motorcycle, and when I built my motorcycle, I took the tip of my finger off. I was like reaching down into the engine, and I accidentally touched it while it was running, and I learned that, you know, the energy and the force and the power that come out of these machines can be way more than what a person can handle, you know. So the heat, the BTUs that come out of these fuel canisters, it's way hotter and way more than what a human hand can deal with. It's just ridiculously hot. It really isn't like working with a campfire. When you cook with a campfire, you know, your hand can get pretty close to the flame. You might even be able to stick your hand in the flame for a second, you know, without really hurting yourself. That is not true with these stoves. They kick out a tremendous amount of BTUs. It's very, very hot. So it's better to have ownership and control over that flame, like with the Soto Windmaster, so that minimizes the amount of time that you stick your hand into this hot area. With the smaller stoves, you've got to set up a windscreen, and you spend a lot more time sticking your hand into this area. Plus, the flame is a little bit more out of control. You can see the flame shooting out from the sides of the mug pot. That makes it pretty difficult to reach in there to turn the stove on and off. It's going to heat up the handle on your mug pot because the flame is coming up around the mug. And the Soto Windmaster, the handle on your mug pot is going to be hot also, but the flame isn't really just shooting out the sides. You know, you have more control over the flame, and you don't have to set up the windscreen, so you don't have to reach in there as often. The handle also is farther away from the flame. Your hand doesn't really come close to the flame when you're controlling the stove. It lights by itself, so you don't need a lighter. It simply just does a lot more on its own than these smaller stoves. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna boil 1 cup of water and just time it and see if there's any difference at all between the boil time in these different stoves. I'm gonna let you see how you can't see the flame shooting out from the sides from the Windmaster, the Soto, and how you really can see just like these torches of flames shooting out from the smaller stoves like the Fire Maple and the BRS. And basically, I'm only going to boil a minimal amount of water. I'm going to boil 1 cup of water. After each boil, I'm going to cool off the cup and start from scratch, and just see how long it took to boil 1 cup of water with each stove, and get this done, and just see, you know, how much of an advantage is there using this Soto Windmaster. All right, so let's check that out. All right, so I've got 200 milliliters of water in this mug. It's a very small amount of water. I'm gonna boil it and just see how long it takes. All right, I'm gonna start it up. Let's do this. Okay, so right away you can see that was pretty effortless. It lights on its own with a piezo igniter. 1 click. It's really quiet. You know, there's some advantages to just the ease of use of the stove right away. Okay, so 1 minute. Okay, this is a rolling boil. All right, so that took exactly 1 minute for like a very serious like rolling boil. The water is sterilized, disinfected. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pour this water out. I'm going to cool off the mug pot completely and start over with the fire maple. All right, so this time we're going to do the same experiment with the fire maple. 200 milliliters of water, very little amount of water, and let's get this thing started. It's pretty stiff. This one's got kind of a stiff handle on it. Okay, so obviously it's louder, but I got a rolling boil and the water is sterilized. It also boiled 10 seconds faster than with the Soto Windmaster, which is interesting. The flame was more out of control, and also what I noticed is that even if the air touched my face, if there was a little bit of movement, it's October right now in San Francisco where I'm at, and the air is kind of cool. I could feel the cool air touching my face, just moving around a little, and I could hear the flame malfunctioning, kind of getting moved around just by even the slightest movement in the air. And I could even see the water struggling to boil because, like, just the movement of the flame was slowing down the boiling process inside the mug pot. But it still boiled the water 10 seconds faster than the more expensive Windmaster. Which is something interesting that I found, is that the BTUs and the boil time, it may be more reliable with the more expensive stove, but as far as like the timing and stuff, you know, the water boiled faster with the fire maple, 10 seconds faster. All right, so let's try the BRS. Okay, now let's try 200 milliliters of water with the BRS. To be fair, this oil canister is a little bit older than these other two. Let's give it a shot. Okay, so right away, I mean, I can see, I'm not sure if you can see this on camera, but I can see that the BRS is malfunctioning much more than the other two stoves. The flame is getting all over the place, and a lot of that heat is being lost. A lot of the heat is not really going into the pot. So it's hissing, and even the slightest movement in the air, you know, causes the flame to move all over the place. It also glows a bright red color. It's kind of awesome. Okay. All right, so 50 seconds. The boil time was the same. All right, so 50 seconds on both of the smaller stoves and 1 minute on the bigger stove. The BRS was by far the scariest to use, no doubt. The fire maple was the loudest, no doubt it was the loudest. And the Windmaster is the most reliable, but it takes slightly longer to boil your water, you know? And that's basically my finding. I think that maybe the BRS stove, it works better with different canisters. I do have one YouTube viewer. I only have about 10 guys who always watch my YouTube videos. One of these guys, he's from England. His name's Couch Camper, and he loves the BRS stove. I would say the BRS, personally, I think the BRS is the most difficult to use and the scariest. Fire maple is very reliable, but the Windmaster is better, obviously. I don't have the UL pot stand, and obviously, you know, this pot stand that I have is the same weight as these other stoves. So there is a weight penalty using the more reliable Soto Windmaster. Plus, there are high elevation situations where your stove canister is not going to work unless it's flipped upside down. And this stove, the Soto Windmaster, does not accommodate that style of cooking. All right? But I think that pretty much wraps up my review for these stoves. I'm actually going to give you guys an update about what's been going on with me this summer. I had a difficult time doing a lot of cowboy camping and stealth camping and section hike overnighters this summer. And I'm going to rant for a minute and tell you guys about that in a second. I'm going to show you a little music video, and then I'll come back and I'll talk about what happened to me this summer, just to give you guys an update for this YouTube channel. Come on. well, basically, I had a super difficult time going on overnighters and camping trips this summer. In July, I went on an overnighter here on Mount Tamalpais, where I live, where I got attacked by mosquitoes, and I had to sleep in my Patagonia micro puff jacket. And that worked out. It was okay, but I was super uncomfortable. It was crazy, and I don't really have a shelter. I don't have a freestanding shelter. I have just like tarps and Cuban fiber shelters that need to be staked out. And to be honest with you, I don't camp in any spots where I can stake out. My number one campsite that I use is shown on Gaia Maps as a mine, a historic mine. And it's on the California Coastal Trail or on the Bay Area Rim Trail. And it's one of the only mines on that trail. So if you look on Gaia, you might see it. And it is marked, but the ground is hard and it isn't possible to stake out. You can tie a tarp up to trees and what have you, or even a bug net. But, you know, I exclusively just do a lot of cowboy camping and stealth camping and what have you. And I wasn't able to do it in July because there was a lot of mosquitoes here. We had a really, really heavy rain in 2019, and then we had a ton of mosquitoes this summer in July, in the beginning of the summer. And then I went on another hike. I did a review of this shirt, and during that hike where I did a review about the Silver Ridge Columbia hiking shirt, I got a crazy case of poison oak that lasted like a month. So my poison oak really didn't go away until like August. And at that point, it was super, super hot. We had a really, really hot summer where all of the hikes that I went on, I would be like drenched with sweat. And I kind of was hesitant to camp overnight in my gear just because I was so soaking wet with sweat. My gear was just destroyed from sweat, so I didn't really want to sleep out. I would bail out like all the time. The other weird issue was with the cops. There were a lot of teenagers and tourists out where I live this summer. They were drag racing and drinking and playing loud music and getting into trouble with the cops. There were a lot of cops out. And I avoided the cops pretty well up until like 2 weeks ago. I went on a day hike. I always carry an 8-pound pack with me just in case I want to sleep out. But the whole entire summer I bailed out on pretty much every single hike. Like 2 weeks ago I hiked out to a lake, and I decided to bail out. I was hiking from the lake to town, to a touristy mountain town nearby. And I got kind of like busted by the cops. There's a parking lot at that lake where you have to pay $5 to park, and they were surprised that I didn't pay to park, that I had hiked in, and they had a problem with it. They called the cops. I was doing a road walk, like a 3-mile road walk from the lake to town. The sun went down about 7:30, and the park closes at 8. I got busted at like 8:15. I was like 15 minutes late getting to town. And they told me I couldn't walk on the road. And more or less there were like 5 cop cars that watched me like do this road walk where, you know, one ranger showed up at the lake. A second ranger asked me what I was doing when I was walking out of the park. A sheriff showed up and asked me what I was doing when I was walking down to town. Another sheriff was waiting like next to the car when my family picked me up in the car. There was a cop car sitting right next to us. And then another cop car watched us like leave town, like drove by as we were getting out of town. So it was like 5 cops kind of checked me out leaving town. And then I ended up moving jobs. Not to sound weird, but I was working at a celebrity VIP security facility where I was a security guard working with like celebrities. And I got moved out of there to more of like a shopping mall security site. I don't know, I guess the result was like the cops kind of felt like I'm just a normal guy. I do a lot of camping and hiking, so why am I working with celebrities? I should be working with normal people. So I literally got moved. Since I'm kind of like a mall cop, I'm a rent-a-cop. I literally got moved from my job to a different job just for doing a 3-mile road walk and being 15 minutes late getting out of the park. So I mean, if backcountry camping and hiking is your hobby and you plan on doing this all the time, I think it's pretty difficult to assume that you're going to be able to obey the rules of the park all the time. You know, it's difficult. If you do this a lot, it's difficult to pay $35
and be at the campsite you're supposed to be at every single time before sundown and have your camp set up before the sun sets, all the time. I personally, I don't do that. And this summer, there were enough cops out that it just seemed like summertime was the wrong time to do this kind of sport. The shoulder season is a better time. The autumn has less bugs, and the springtime is green, and the winter time is good. I like camping in the winter because I don't sweat as much, and my winter gear is more reliable than my summer gear. My summer gear has cold spots, like there's spots where the insulation is missing, and if there's a cold snap, I'll get cold. Because my summer gear, it's not very warm, and so if it gets cold, it's going to be a problem. Whereas if it's cold out, there's less people, there's less cops, there's less mosquitoes, there's less heat, there's less sweat, and your gear is more reliable. So the other big issue that I had was with my food. I was buying these rice sides and pasta sides from like Walmart or Target for $1, and they started to taste terrible. I mean, each time I had a success with one of those recipes and it tasted good, the next time I would cook it, it would taste terrible. It would be like one time it would be, I could eat it. The next time it would be terrible. It was like back and forth, And so just cooking this food has been really difficult. I found that it's possible to buy the Mountain House Essentials bucket, where the Mountain House meals are only $6 each if you buy the whole bucket. So it's like 4 lasagnas, 4 rice and chickens. It's 12 meals, and they come down to like $6 each. That's more or less the most reliable camping food that I found. But it kind of lends itself to the issue of whether or not to even use a stove. If the food is going to be terrible, it doesn't really make a difference if the food is cooked. Boiling the water sterilizes the water and prevents you from getting sick. But the BTUs that are kicked out by the fuel canisters are so high that it kind of can damage your gear. I had a situation where I cooked some food with the fuel canister next to my pack. My pack was about this far away from the stove, and it kind of melted my pack a little. In this video, I cooked myself some mashed potatoes, and I put it in a titanium bowl with a lid on it. I put that titanium bowl into my pack without a cozy, and it melted some of the DWR that was on this jacket. So like on the back of the jacket, luckily it was on the lower back right side of the jacket, it melted the DWR, and it looked like it melted some of the dry down. And there was a cold spot, a hole in the jacket like that. I threw this jacket into the washing machine and it came out fine. But, just basic heat from the boiling water is way more than what UL nylon and Dyneema can handle. So, ultra lightweight Dyneema and ultra lightweight nylon, 10 denier nylon, etc., or quantum Pertex, none of these ultra lightweight materials can handle the high BTUs from these stoves. So every time you use one of these fuel canister stoves, you're running the risk of damaging your gear. And it makes it pretty difficult to use. That combined with the food being pretty bad, and it makes it hard to use the stove. It makes it hard to justify using the stove. If the food doesn't really require boiling water, if it can be cooked with regular water, it's almost worth it to just get a peanut butter jar, just put the food in the jar, pour the water in the jar, shake it, wait 45 minutes, and just eat it cold. If the BTUs from those fuel canisters are really going to damage your gear most of the time. I was able to get that Windmaster stove for only $14, so it was worth it to get it, and now I have it, and it's an investment. But as far as like whether it's worth it to use the stove or cook your food, that's a separate issue. It does add weight to your pack, and the opportunity to damage your gear goes way up from those ridiculously high BTUs from that fuel canister. The stoves are ridiculously hot. I mean, the heat is insane, and it will definitely damage your stuff. So it's difficult to say whether or not it's worth it to even use the stove. It's different. Going stoveless, it does seem like the right direction to go in if you're planning on traveling ultra lightweight. If you want to keep your pack weight below 10 pounds, one of the easiest ways to do that would be to just go stoveless and soak your food. That just seems obvious to me, but so yeah, it's been frustrating. I had a really frustrating summer. The food, the cops, the kids, the tourists, the heat, the sun, the mosquitoes, the poison oak, everything went wrong, you know. But yeah, anyway, thanks a lot for watching this YouTube channel. I hope you're enjoying it. I do plan on doing more of it, and thanks a lot.